What's going on, everyone? It's Elias here at the Rainy Forge, and boy is it a good day today. A lot going on here at the Forge. Still moving into the new place, hopefully in about 2 weeks. Got put on a little bit of a delay with all that. Just getting a structure set up for my forge and everything, and we're just making sure everything gets done right, and everything is by the book and by code, so I don't have any issues later on. So, wanted to do a short video today for a client who's ordered a knife off of me, and I wanted to keep this more of a short video. I've got so much going on, and it takes so much of my time uploading a full video, and I just did one. Feel free to check that one out. And so I just wanted to do a quick video and have the focus be on Hamon lines, and also I'm going to do a little bit of sheath and leatherwork, just to kind of tack two ideas in the same video. So, what we're working with here is I have this knife, and so what I've gone ahead and done here already to get to this point, I've cut out the knife and I've ground my rough bevel, and it's currently covered in forge scale because I took it out to my forge and I went through a process which is called austenitization. Now what that is, and I'm not a metallurgist, so feel free to adjust me in the comments if necessary. Basically what that process is you hold steel at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. And what that does is it takes all the molecules that are within the steel and kind of helps pull them together and homogenize them. So there's many different types of molecules within steel. All these different ites are what they called. I don't know all of them off the top of my head. Again, I'm not a metallurgist, but I've watched quite a few videos and kind of learned what I'm doing as far as austenitization goes. So at different temperatures, those different materials within the steel become not liquid, but mobile. They start moving around. All those molecules start moving around. And over time, as they move around, they slowly create a pattern, like a weave within the steel. And so what you want to do is you want to heat your steel up to the right temperature and hold it for the right amount of time. And all of those molecules will interlock together and create a good structure within your steel that is less likely to chip or break or crack. So basically you're just strengthening the steel, like rebar in concrete essentially. So I've gone ahead and done that with this knife because this knife is made out of W2, which is a great tool steel with a really good high carbon content, which leads it to being perfect steel for doing a kick-ass Hamon line. Now, if you don't know what a Hamon line is, well, that is a Japanese design technique, and myself being a quarter Okinawan, I love me whatever the Japanese be doing. So, it is a traditional Japanese technique where you apply furnace cement or some sort of heat-resistant medium to the spine of the blade while you're heat treating the blade. And what that does is it keeps your spine soft and durable while hardening your edge. So it gives a lot of durability to the knife. But what that also does, if you acid etch the knife after that process is completed, you get a beautiful Hamon line on the blade, which you can see in katanas and tantos, and many, many, many of my knives. As I said, I'm a quarter Okinawan, and that's kind of my thing, and I've gotten pretty stinking good at Hamon lines, at least with this W2 steel, which I get from the New Jersey Steel Baron. Now, each pouring of steel is different. So if I order a W2 steel from the New Jersey Steel Baron and someone else orders a W2 from another steel supplier, their technique for doing a Hamon might be slightly different than mine. So when I go through the process and tell you how I do a Hamon, I want to let you know that this is how I do it with the steel that I get from the New Jersey Steel Baron specifically. This is what I've tried and tested over many years to get exactly how I want it. So, let's jump into it. There she is, nice and cleaned up. And you always want to clean, put my pipe down here. You always want to clean all of the forged scale off of your knife before you take it to a grinder. And the reason for that is forged scale, the stuff on the back here, is actually incredibly hard. Any steel that has any kind of chromium in it, that's what's in the forged scale. Any other stuff, impurities and whatnot, comes with the forged scale. And it's actually really, really hard. So what that will do is it'll actually dull your ceramic grinding belts quite a bit. So I always make sure I use the wire wheel and clean as much of that forged scale off as I can before I take it to my belt. And that helps keep my belts sharp and going for quite a while. It doesn't need to be perfect, just enough so I have good texture on there for the burning cement as well. Blaze real quick. So there's the knife, and I'll just clean this off real quick, and we'll go ahead and put the furnace cement on. What I have here is called satinite or satanite, however you want to pronounce it, and I buy this off Amazon, and this is what I use for my medium for doing Hamon lines. It's basically a furnace cement that has very high heat resistance, which is what you need because your knife should be getting to pretty hot when you heat treat it, and we don't want this to burn off and cause issues. So I'm just mixing this up here, and what I'm looking for is kind of a loose porridge. So that's about the right consistency. You can see. There you go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to apply this furnace cement to the spine, right on the back. And you want a really good amount, especially with a big knife like this. And just because you really don't want the heat getting up there to the spine to give you that really awesome striking Hamon line. So there's that on there. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to draw some lines down, and those are going to be my main lines on this Hamon. And this is actually probably a little bit too loose, but it'll work out fine. And I want to make sure I fill those in, get a nice thick coating. And then I'm going to end up matching that on the other side. But before I do that, I've got my hot air gun. And I'm just going to heat this. And as you'll see as I heat this, it'll start bubbling up a little bit, and then you'll see that surface kind of solidify. And that's exactly what we're looking for. And it'll actually kind of start cooking and hardening like cookies do in the oven. It's the best way I can describe it. Gets that nice hard surface going. And because this stuff is a little bit more liquidy than I'd want, it's going to take a little bit longer to heat it. Usually it's just a couple seconds with the heat gun gets it there, but I'll do it. So now that I've got that hardened, when I come back through with my tool, I'll be able to get a little bit more texture and detail in here. And that's what I want to do. The detailing doesn't need to be super thick. It just kind of breaks up your line a little bit and makes it a little bit more interesting to look at, a little bit less basic than just a line that goes all the way down or just a couple stripes that go up and down. So that's what we're going to do, and then I'm just going to flatten all of this, and you can see it's still very, very liquidy, but we're going to flatten it, and then I'm going to hit it with the heat gun again, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and once she's solidified and I can hold the blade upright without it falling off, I will show you what that looks like. There's our furnace cement on there, and you can see it's actually steaming because of how hot it is from the air gun, which is good. And all that residual heat is going to help kind of cook this into the metal and just really get a good, tight, airtight seal on the steel. So when I go ahead and heat this up, the heat doesn't travel into the back of the knife as easily. So now this just gets set aside for about 20 minutes or so while that furnace cement continues to harden, and then we'll throw it into the forge. But in the meantime, we're going to jump over and do some leather work. Alright, so working on the sheath here, and I've already gone ahead, I've cut out my shape that I want for the sheath, and I've scribed a line all the way around the edge. And so the next thing we're going to do is go through with my gouging tool and just cut along that line and put a nice groove there. So there's our groove all the way around, and the next thing I'm going to do is run upstairs real quick and water this down lightly with some hot water. And what the water does is it softens the leather up, gets you a better tool, but you don't want it to be too wet, because if that's the case, when you go to press your tool into the leather and you lift up, the leather kind of just forms back to the way it was and you don't get a great tool. So lightly coated with warm water is the best. There's the leather, nice and damp, and as you can see on the back, you can see it is not soaked all the way through, which is exactly what you want. If it is soaked all the way through, you have too much water, let it sit, let it dry for a little bit. And the first thing we're going to do is press in my logo. And this gets stamped into my knives and into my sheaths, so when I get big and famous, everyone can tell it's a Rainy Forge knife. See if it'll focus on that. Nope. Alright. Come on, you. Why aren't you focusing? There we go. So there's the stamp. Pardon my dirty fingers. And so we're going to start with this tool and go ahead and follow the whole edge of our groove here. And I like to start so everything kind of matches up by going to any of my corners and covering the corner with tooling. So there's all my corners. So that way now, when I go along the edge, I have everything kind of mathed out, so it'll be nice and uniform. And it'll terminate in those corners really nice and pretty. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to take my caliper, and this is what I use to scribe that line for the groove. And I'm just going to open it up a little bit further, and I'm going to scribe a new line on the inside, and just follow my edge as best as I can. And I'm going to go over this whole thing in pencil once I'm done, so I can see exactly where to cut with my grooving tool. Measure twice, cut once. So there's our line for our inner circle, or inner square, rectangle shape. So now we'll take the grooving tool again, and we'll cut that out, and then you'll really be able to see this line here. So hopefully, once I get to the new shop with better lighting, it'll be a lot easier to show all of this off while simultaneously not having a giant glare on the camera. Because unfortunately, my really nice light that I bought off of Amazon that works great puts off a little bit too much light, so I have to turn it down. And when I turn it down so it doesn't glare, you can't see the pencil marks. So there's our groove, and now you can see what we're working with. So what I want to do with this tooling and the coloring of this sheath is I want to match the customer's seat on his motorcycle. Here's a picture of that. So we're going to go with the dark brown and the light brown, and to match that little bit of texturing that he has on his motorcycle, we're going to switch to a new tool. So this is the new tool that we're working with. Just another leather punch. And what this one does is this one's purely just a texture tool. You use it and you keep turning it. Just to keep it abstract, and so you don't see a pattern. Just keep turning it. And that's what that looks like. You can kind of see that pattern right there. See if I can get closer with it. There we go, that's better. Yeah, so you can see that nice pattern starting in there. So that's going to go along our entire edge of the sheath here. And I'm going to go ahead and just hammer that out. So there's that texture all the way around the edge. And now I got to texture the center here. And so what I want to do, I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to mark a line right down the center here. And that's going to help me with the next tool that I'm going to go ahead and use. Which is going to be this one. Kind of a crescent half moon with lines through it. I call it the shell pattern. Just like the small one that we used for the outside, but a little bit bigger. And so I'm just going to hammer in this first line. Just take your time, nice and straight. And then go ahead and do the next row. And kind of stack everything and alternate it. So that's how that's going to look. So I have my sheath all nice and dry and ready for some dye to go on there. I also cut out my belt loop strip. And this just has to dry for a little while because it's still wet from me tooling it. But we're going to go ahead and color the sheath here. So what I'm using, and I love this stuff, is Fibing's leather dye. And this is dark brown. And again, we're going to be matching the coloring on the customer's motorcycle seat. So normally I go and the outside strip of my leather, I like to do black. But with this, since we're matching, we're going to go and do this dark brown. And it's actually going to turn out really, really sweet. With all the coloring that I plan on doing. So I'm just going through, and I want a pretty good amount of dye on my little cotton swab here, so that I'm actually not even getting up to my gouge line. I'm just behind it, and because there's enough dye on my cotton swab, it naturally seeps out, and that's how I get a really good, clean, crisp line without taking too much time. Because again, time is money. And I want to make sure that I get a really good coating here. Everything's pretty uniform in color. And I might actually be able to do this whole outside without dipping again. We'll see. I think I will. There we go. And I'm just going to keep this dye over here as this dries and starts to lighten up a little bit. I'm just going to go back through and hit it again and keep it nice and dark. And it's actually really dark right now, and that color will fade slightly again as it's drying, and also when I hit it on my buffing wheel to polish the leather at the end. So I just want to make sure that enough of that dye seeps in there so that once it's polished and everything, it stays nice and dark brown. So the next thing I'm going to do, as I step away for a second, is I'm going to switch over to my next color, which is a light brown. And this is literally just this dark brown that's had some water added to it to make it lighter. So same deal, get my cotton swab, get a lot of dye on there. And this time I can just go willy-nilly, because I'm just going to coat the whole thing in this color. And this one will definitely need to be dipped multiple times because I want to make sure I get a really, really good coating on here. So there's that full front side, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the back here and just get this covered as well. And you don't actually have to do the entire inside of the sheath since you won't be seeing the inside of the sheath, but I like to just coat everything just in case, and it only takes a few more seconds, and I think life is better when we don't just half-ass things and take shortcuts. So I just go ahead and do the entire inside of all of my sheaths. So we're just going to get a pretty good coating. And this is going to actually look darker once I add the antiquing paste, because your contrast of your blacks and your browns makes everything look darker even though it isn't darker. So I think that's actually going to darken perfectly. So that's how that looks. And again, this is just going to sit and dry for a little bit, and then I can hit it with that antiquing paste. And hopefully in the meantime, my strip will be nice and dry, and I'll go ahead and dye that as well. So I can hit everything with the antiquing paste. Alright, so the sheath has had some time to dry, and now I'm going to go ahead and use this antiquing paste. More awesome stuff by Fibings. And just grab a little bit of cloth here. This is a pretty easy, straightforward process. You just get a bunch of paste and just kind of spread it around. And you want to be pretty generous with it. And don't worry too much about getting into all the little cracks and crevices, because we're actually going to get all of that with a little brush. This just kind of gets material on the sheath. I'm going to do the same thing to the little strip here. We'll just throw that away. Close up my paste so it doesn't dry out. Then I'm going to take this brush here, and we're just going to give a nice quick brush. And that seems to do just a really good job of getting that paste in all of the little cracks and crevices. And really just getting everything to pop. Same thing on our strip here. A lot of excess paste on the little strip. So we're just going to clean everything off. And I have this, these are my favorite, these work wonders. Tub of towels. These things work great, especially for epoxy. Whatever chemicals they have going on in there do a really good job of breaking down epoxy whenever I get it on my fingers. So I'm just going to wipe this down real quick. Nothing too invasive. Just clean off that excess paste so when I go to punch my holes and sew together the sheath, there isn't a bunch of extra black paste which is going to get all over my white thread and dirty it and make the whole thing look ugly. So that's going to sit now for really only about 10, 15, 20 minutes. And while that sits, I'm actually going to go ahead and glue on my little strip. More, as you can see, I have a bit of an addiction. More fibrings. Grab a clamp. Throw this on here, give myself a good amount of material on the sheath to work with, and just clamp it up. And now while everything's drying, that glue will dry, and then we will drill holes for our threading to go in there. And then the whole thing will get bent back over, glued again, and then more holes, and that'll get threaded as well. And I will take you through that process once this is dry. But for now, let's hop back over to our knife. Alright, she's nice and dried, and we're going to go ahead and heat treat her. Get the forge cranking hot. And then I have my little bit of heat brick in there. And the knife's gonna sit right next to that, so we heat predominantly just the blade of the knife. So we heat predominantly just the blade of the knife here. So this is gonna go in there and just kind of get propped up. And we're just gonna let that heat, and I'm gonna leave this camera running, and you'll see how long it takes. And all we're looking for is just for the blade of that knife and the beginning of the handle to turn a nice hot dull cherry orange, and that's when we know it's hot enough to quench. About to quench the knife. She's gotten up to temperature. So this is Parks 50 quenching oil. It quenches a little bit slower than my brine, which I have here. So I start with the Parks 50, hold it there for a second or two, and then dunk it in my brine. Here we go. Nice big fireball on that one. So here's the knife, and still got some furnace cement and a lot of oil on there, but we'll go ahead and file test it real quick. She slides like glass. That's exactly what we want to see. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring her inside and clean as much of this crap off of here as I can with my wire wheel. And then she's going to go in my toaster oven, and she's going to go through 2 tempering processes at, I think I'm going to do this one at 400. So for 400 for 1 hour, 2 times, and that'll temper this nice, and it'll be super good and durable, and it can be a good chopper if needed. So go ahead and do all that. So as you can see, here is the knife out of the tempering oven, and it's got that nice straw yellow color, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. That means she got up to temperature and she's nice and tempered. You can see with what's left here of the furnace cement, that's where our Hamon line is going to be when she's cleaned and acid etched. So right now, because she's already at 60 grit, I'm going to go ahead and bump her right up to 120, and then take her all the way up to 600 grit on my belts, and then dunk her in acid. So let's get grinding. Alright, so that's at 600 grit, and if the light hits it right, you can actually just barely see that Hamon line. See that? There you go, right there. So you can just barely see that Hamon line. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit this on my buffing wheel, and then it's going to get dipped in acid to really bring that line out. Nice and shiny. Alright, so what I have here is called ferric chloride, and this is my acid etching solution that I use. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our knife here, dunk it in the ferric chloride, set my timer for 30 seconds. So slowly what's going on here is the acid is eating away at the whole knife, but because we have a hardened blade and a softened spine, it eats the two areas at a different rate. This also leaves some nice shiny white clad line right between the hard and soft steel. So we'll pull this out, and you can actually just barely start to see the Hamon line. Let me clean off some of this acid here so I don't drip it everywhere. And you can actually just start to see that Hamon line show up on the blade. And so what I'm going to do is clean off all that acid, and then we're going to hit this with rubbing compound and repeat the process probably another 2 times, maybe 3, depending on how deep this Hamon line is. So now that I have this cleaned off, we got to get rid of all the oxides that are on here. And the best way to do that is with number 7, rubbing compound. This stuff absolutely kicks ass, and I still plan on doing a video in the near future about knife patina, because when you have a high carbon steel knife and you cut up acidic foods, it tends to leave a patina depending on the steel, and this is the best way to clean that up and get your knife back to a mirror polish or a flat polish, whatever it started as. So this stuff's awesome. Buy some if you want to clean up your knives nice and pretty if they've gone patina on you. But we're going to take a little bit of this rubbing compound. And I like to use shop cloths just because they have a little bit of a grit to them, and that helps a lot getting rid of all the oxides that have built up on the knife. So we're just going to give this a nice quick rub down on both sides. So I'm thinking probably just about 2 more cycles with the acid, the rubbing compound, and then how we finish on the buffing wheel. But you can see that Hamon line is going to be really, really nice. So we'll take this knife over to the buffing wheel, clean it up, and then dip it in acid again. Do that a couple more times, and we'll have a nice, pretty Hamon line. So here is our final Hamon line. And normally I go with a mirror polish with the Hamon line, but this one it really just turned out a lot better with a matte finish. In fact, it really has this like really beautiful white line that goes and surrounds the whole Hamon line, and that's actually called a clad line. And usually you see that with like a sand mire or Damascus, but a lot of times that'll pop really nice on a Hamon line if you get a really good quench. So the next thing to do with this guy is to put a final edge on it and slap a handle on there. We're going with black walnut with some blue resin inlay, and that's going to look really pretty. But again, I wanted to keep this video short and sweet because I want to get this knife out to the customer as soon as I can. So I'm going to do all that behind the scenes, but I'm going to pop right back and finish up that sheath with you. So let's get back to that. So here's our sheath, and I actually went ahead and glued on the little belt loop here. And I decided to do that off camera because here in New York, we had a week with multiple days over 80 degrees, which is, you know, normal for summer. But our humidity has been crazy lately. And even though I've got a dehumidifier running here in my basement, things are so humid here that my leather glue is just not drying at all. And if you hit it with the hot air gun, or if I put it in my toaster oven on warm, the glue just separates for whatever reason. It'll dry, but then it just separates. So I have to do everything air dry over time. And with this humidity, glue is just not drying fast at all. So I wanted to give this plenty of time to dry overnight so I can get this knife done later today. As you can see, I'm wearing a different shirt. So yeah, different day, day 2. But what we are going to do right now with this sheath is I have some hot water. And we're going to apply hot water on the inside of the sheath, just down the center. I don't want to get it on the edges because the more moisture there is in the leather glue doesn't get a good grab on the leather and it starts coming apart. So I really just want to apply hot water just to the spine so that when I fold and bend the sheath to glue it in place, the leather doesn't crack on the outside, because that'll happen. If you don't wet your leather and you go to bend it, if it's dry, it will crack. And that looks terrible, and we don't want that. So we want moisture down the center so we get a nice, clean fold. So yeah, we're just going to take some water here. Just be as generous as I can and just really get that center seam soaked in. And usually, you know, when it's fully soaked through, that when you add more water it doesn't absorb and it just kind of sits on the surface. So right now we're pretty much there. So I always like to pre-fold the leather and get everything lined up here. Usually there's a bit of overlap no matter what, which is fine, but I want to see exactly the best place to set this leather, so I'm cutting off as little excess as possible so I don't mess with my trim, and I keep everything nice and straight and neat. So that nice first fold helps a lot. So now when I go through with my leather glue, and then fold it over, everything's already pretty much lined up. And I don't have to fight with it. I go ahead and put some clamps on there. Alright, so I've got my sheath. It's been sitting for a couple hours, and glue looks like it's nice and dry, which is good. I was hoping this wasn't going to have to sit overnight, so I want to get this done today. So the next thing that we got to do is, if you can see all of the little bits of overlap on the leather along the edge there, all of that needs to get trimmed off. And the way that I like doing that, since there's nothing too big here, I'll just take it straight to a 120 belt and clean that up, and then take it to a 220. And then we're also going to put a nice little bevel along the edge here, and on the opposite side as well. And that'll just make everything look nice and pretty and neat. And then we'll move over to doing all the sewing. Alright, so I have my needles attached to my thread, and now I'm going to show you how I saddle stitch. So you start with the first hole, and if you're not doing a rivet, I usually go 3 holes down and saddle stitch to the right and then back again to the left, and that pulls this really nice and tight and makes it less likely for you to cut it. But because we have these rivets here, I don't have to do that. So we're just going to start on that first hole and pull everything and make sure that our thread is nice and even. And then I kind of pinch the back with one finger and do 1, and then go back through on the back, 2. So that's what that looks like. And then we'll take the other side and do the same thing. And as you're threading, just always make sure that you're pushing through that hole and not cutting into your thread on the other side. That keeps everything nice and tight, so just pull everything nice and tight. And then we want to check that our thread is still about the same length, which is good. And then just repeat that process and go down the whole thing. And I do like every 5 holes or so, I'll switch, go to the other one, pull everything tight again, and then just go the whole way. It's always hard to pull the needle through when I've been working on stuff all day, as my hands get super smooth from grinding steel and handles and whatnot, so it's so hard to get a really good grip on the needles. But I'll just finish this side off here. And then I'll show you how I end a run of stitching. Alright, so I got to the end. I I've got a good amount of thread left. As I said, you always want lots of extra thread at the end. Makes things much easier for finishing. So this is the side that's going to be showing. So I'm going to take my thread on this side, go back one hole, go all the way through, then flip. And then that thread that we just pulled through here, you want to go ahead and push it through underneath that last little bit of thread there, and make sure we're underneath it, not in the thread. So you're making a little loop, and then you take this one and go through the loop, and then pull everything nice and tight. And you'll see it'll cinch up on itself, and that keeps things nice and tight. And then I just do a basic single knot like you're tying your shoes. And that's all you need. So now just clip that extra thread off of there. And then I grab my lighter and burn that down. Burn that down and then just push it flat. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this side as well, and I will get back to you once this is fully sewed up. And here is the final knife. Fits beautifully in the sheath. Have that awesome Hamon line on there. Beautiful black walnut blue resin, brass pins and a brass lanyard hole. And, of course, shaving sharp. You can see all that hair on there. Good and sharp. Don't worry, Sammy, I'm cleaning her up before I send her your way. And there you have it. Nice, quick, easy, simple video. Focus on leatherworking and Hamon lines. And I'm sure I'm going to be doing plenty more videos on Hamon lines and probably some more leatherwork at some point in time in the future. But for now, there you have it.